we should just do this and record it. I think it's going to be easier than trying to get this thing shared at this time.
All right, well, we're live now. So, hi, this is Ibadi and X
Okay,
from the
hi.
Candid Frame, and we're doing another TCF photo chat with my good friend Bruce Smith, who has been on the Candid Frame podcast a couple of times. And for some of you who have watched some of these previous videos, the whole idea of these segments is to focus on a discussion on a particular product, let's say a lens or some sort of photo accessory or some feature if we're talking about a camera, and how that makes a difference in a photographer's photography. We don't want to just talk about specifications and without the context of images, and that's one of the things that I think is missing from a lot of the discussions that I see on YouTube and on the internet. So the whole idea is we're going to talk about gear, but we're going to do that in conjunction with photographs, and I think that's the
Did
way
you
it
say
should
beer?
be.
Did I hear you say beer?
Not beer,
Oh,
not
I'm
beer.
sorry. Sorry.
That's for later. But who you're hearing now is Bruce Smith, who is somewhere in France after a lengthy period in the UK. But Bruce, why don't you, for people who don't know you and know your work, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay, well, I'm Bruce Smith. I'm an old hat. I've been taking pictures commercially since the 1980s. My first ever decent job, or my first ever sort of what I would consider to be a fashion commission, was in 1983, and in the days of film, and in the days when photographers all shot with big long lenses, which I carried on using for a long time. But my work's involved shooting all kinds of things, for magazines to advertising campaigns to catalogs to lookbooks. Traveled the world from Alaska to Thailand to Morocco to Africa. Shooting sometimes with supermodels, more often just with the average agency models. But it's been an exciting and long life making pictures, and that's the most important thing.
And you're a Nikon shooter, because we're going to be talking about the Nikkor lenses. What camera are you using?
I use a Nikon. I use either a D3, D300. What I seem to be using these days. I'm not a great gadget person, really, as in with the camera, for instance, as in using Nikon. I've been using Nikons for as long as I can remember. And when people say that the differences between Canon and Nikon, I just say, well, I just know where the buttons are with Nikon. About it. I mean, they all do a similar job, and they all make good pictures, because it's not necessarily the camera that makes the pictures. It's you, really. So so I can't be what's the word for an advocate for any particular brand, but just that Nikon's been the cameras well, actually, there is a reason behind it. Actually, it's Nikon were the first 35mm camera manufacturers to bring out a professional autofocus body with the f4, and that was basically the first sort of serious Nikon that I actually bought. I've been using Nikons before, but not nothing that I can remember. But the D4 was the because it was autofocus, and I was either going blind or something, I don't know. But I went through a spell of having pictures out of focus. So of course the Nikon F4 was the camera that sort of saved my life, and I've carried on using Nikon ever since, because I've probably still got the lenses that I bought then.
Well, I imagine you've had the opportunity to
yeah,
use a
Nikon
variety.
have been the cameras that I've just stuck by, not for any other reasons, but as I said, the buttons are in the right places.
So tell me
So are
about.
you techie guys, or are you camera buffs? But it's quite simple.
So tell me about. We're going to talk about the 17 to 55 2.8. Tell me about that particular lens choice, because you said you're using a full frame and you're using an APS-C size camera.
Yes.
So tell me about the choices.
On the full frame, I switched to a 24-70.
Okay.
So it's the same. They're basically the same sort of the same viewpoint, same sort of same angle. You know what I mean?
So what is it about
Um,
when you're using the 17 to 55 on the 300 then? What appeals to you in terms of that focal length range?
right. Well, there's a little story behind it, as in why I like to shoot with wider lenses, and this goes back to a question that I was once asked about a picture, as in how do I get that stuff in the picture? I think we've talked about this. I think, have we? You and I?
It
Stuff in
I can't
pictures,
remember where they actually found its way to a recording or not, but maybe.
Uh, Somebody asked me how I achieved something in my pictures, and in the process of actually me trying to find out what it was that I was doing in my pictures, or not necessarily specifically in the process, but in the period between being asked about it and then having to give a talk about it, I started experimenting with different things. And also, I'm always providing my clients with options of choices with their pictures, from close up, 3/4 length, full length, and detail shots. So during any one outfit shot, I will have to provide my client with a range of those sort of variations. And if you're in a restricted studio space, for instance, you can't always get full length pictures of big, huge gowns when you want using the fashion photographers, the go-to lens of the 80 to 200 or 70 to 200, which was a pretty much a lens that I used a lot beforehand. But in the process of actually this discovery stuff, I was doing a bridal wear shoot in a small studio that I had in Soho, and I actually worked at, and the studio was not long enough to be able to shoot everything with a 70 to 200. So I shot with smaller lenses. I can't remember exactly what they were at the time, but it was certainly sort of medium to wide zoom. And in the process of coming in closer to my model to get the sort of close-up shots and the detail shots, there was a little reaction that happened between the model and I. And when I moved further back, I actually noticed that this sort of reaction was a little bit less, and something actually clicked with me with this. It was like, well, I've got to experiment with this a little bit. So I carried on doing my shoot, and I was actually watching what was happening. And every time you actually come into that, not necessarily the comfort zone with somebody, but when you come in closer with somebody, it's like you're having an intimate conversation with somebody, or if you can measure the difference by standing in a crowded place and on a soapbox and shouting to everybody, and the people at the back are not necessarily going to get the expressions in your face and the nuances of the things you're saying and stuff. But when you're having an intimate conversation with somebody on a one-to-one basis, the reaction to each other becomes very, very different. And this is the sort of this is what the potency, or the sort of the energy that's actually in the picture to somebody, because you're creating that energy between you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I actually noticed doing this bridal wear shoot, and I've been playing with the sort of process ever since. And on top of that, I also have shot a fair amount of hosiery and lingerie for the underwear manufacturers, and they like the model's legs to look extremely long. And again, I started shooting this stuff before you could fiddle about with it in Photoshop, So of course you had, to create this sort of dynamic picture of long legs, I would often shoot with a wide angle lens from a low angle, being very, very careful how you position the legs, and you can make a model's legs look like 3 feet longer. So this is basically the sort of the main reasons why I actually like to shoot with the 17 to 55. It's also an extremely sharp lens, considering it's not a fixed focal length. So it's really good all rounder for me, anyway.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because I've experienced that myself. Because as much as I know that some fashion and glamour people like the 70 to 200 or 80 to 200 2.8 equivalents, largely for the way that like blur the background and how it renders the subject relative to the background, but that what you're talking about, that level of engagement that you have, is very, very different when you're shooting someone who's a good distance away from you, as opposed to being relatively relatively half the distance away. And that, I think, has been something that I've always observed about your work, is that that intimacy has always been really really important. But there is some distortion that you can get, particularly where you're working with the wide angle. Is
Yes.
that not a
Yeah, but
concern,
that's
or how do you sort of adjust for that?
yes. Well, first and foremost, if you're taking a picture of a tall building, if you take the picture from the tall building from low down, you're going to get converging verticals. And the same thing if you go the other way, you're going to get the verticals go the opposite way. And the best thing to do to get a building as straight as you can get it is to sort of shoot from a position where you're more or less in the middle. And slightly further back. Now, when I'm doing my shoots, for instance, I will actually, I want the impact, and I want that connection. So I start off at the point where I've got a balance between both, where the distortion, because the position of where you're shooting from, because it's not the lens that creates the distortion, it's the position that you're shooting from. Okay, so I get the balance of that right, and also I shoot such a variety of variations on the framing anyway. Again, to get to find the exciting lines that we like and stuff. So, and again, checking for that distortion. I mean, I never ever photograph a fashion model close up, high up, and unless she's wearing an incredibly long and sort of a dress that sort of spreads out lower down. Again, if you look at looking at pictures, you can actually explain this, or I can explain it in more detail.
Yeah, let me do that, and let me do the screen share here, and let me just lock in my window, so so we don't flip back and forth. And give me a moment, and I'll open that up.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Can you see that?
That's you. Yes. Okay. Right, now look, this is actually shot. You can see it's actually shot quite wide angle, but it doesn't look. It's not unflattering for the model. And I've actually probably shot this at the longer end of the 55. This was actually shot on the D300.
Okay, and that's going to give you pretty much the equivalent of a 24 to 70, but the field of view is going to be similar.
On a full frame.
Yeah. And what? Why do you choose to use a full frame in combination with a full frame camera? Is there a particular reason, or is it?
The reason, I mean, I shoot with the D300 because it's actually faster, and doesn't buffer as quickly. And look, also if it's just for fun, this is actually this picture that you're looking at now was actually taken during a workshop that I was teaching to a guy who wanted to learn how to shoot portraiture, and he wanted to learn how to connect with his subject. This has actually got that enigmatic smile like the Mona Lisa on this picture. It's when I look at it, I'm absorbed by her, because of that look in her eye, and you can read all kinds of feelings and emotions into her face, and the connection is very strong, And that's the thing that I'm thinking about when I'm actually shooting. I'm not actually thinking about my lens. I'm not actually thinking about my camera body, and that same level of emotion, it wouldn't matter if I was shooting it with a D300 or a Hasselblad, Do you know what I mean?
No, I completely get it.
Because this is the okay. Now, if I'm doing a shoot for a client, for instance, and the client's going to want to do, they're going to be printed in print, or they're going to be in big posters or whatever, I'll shoot them on a D3, or a D3, whatever is available. D3 is the one I usually use. Quite often, actually, I find myself actually using any camera that's available. For instance, I've often been there. I've had a camera that's been handed to me by my client and shot with that, because the client's gone, I want you to shoot on this Contax or shoot on this Sony or whatever it is. It's not, and again, this is, it's not always it's not the camera that does it, But if the client's wants big posters and stuff, I'll shoot on a higher pixel camera. But for general everyday stuff, that's only going to be viewed on the computer, or maybe printed up to maybe A3 or A2. And even from the D300, the pictures are pretty damn sharp, even at I've actually just done a shoot a few weeks ago, well, a couple of months ago, and produced a meter by 0.75 of a meter shot on a D300, and they're beautiful. You know, so all this stuff about this sort of pixel size, you know, it's beyond me. I might be wrong. I don't know.
Well, I think it's relative to how your images get used, because you're
Yes.
doing the glamour and the fashion work. A lot of that stuff, when it sees print, is going to be in a print ad or in a catalog, and so these are not going to be typically going to be like billboard sized photographs.
No.
So the resolution of these cameras is more than adequate. It's more important that you get the look to the and the feel of the image.
Yes.
That's bottom line.
Well, I mean, these guys who do the sort of go in and they do the serious Photoshop stuff, you know, they're actually getting in there. They're removing things that you wouldn't actually normally see, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But because the depth of these images, or the bit depth and the quality of them, is absolutely phenomenal. So it shows absolutely everything, even the things that the human eye doesn't see, you know.
Are you working primarily in aperture priority mode or manual mode, and when you're shooting?
What's priority mode?
A mode, aperture priority, where you choose the aperture and the shutter speed.
I only ever use manual. I can't remember. I'm scared to shoot on auto.
Okay.
Because it's like I'm not in control of it, you know.
So with your choice of aperture, how do you, like, for example, in this one, it looks like it was shot fairly wide open.
It's actually shot, I have actually cheated on this one a little bit. I actually sort of, it will have been shot at 2.8 because I was actually shooting in quite low light.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually shot in the doorway of the studio here at the house, you know. I've actually deliberately knocked it back, and from behind her eyes in filters, which is very unlike me, but I just thought it just, her eyes and her lips are the things that are important on that picture. And I think not that it sort of loses anything by being sharper, but and when you're working closer, obviously working even at f2.8, your depth of field, if you've got your head turned slightly to the side, you'll have one eye in focus and the other eye out of focus. So you got to be very careful.
Oh yeah, I experienced that all too often, where the slight tilt of the head, and then one eye is real sharp and the other one's not.
Yeah, especially with those longer lenses, it's even worse when you work wide open.
So when you're choosing to work wide open, in terms of doing a portrait like this, obviously in this particular case, you really want to emphasize the lips and the eyes. Yes. So you shoot wide open. But when you're doing a close-up portrait, are there times when you choose a smaller aperture like 5.6 or f8, and if so, when?
Yes. When they're wearing perhaps some earrings, then they need to see the earrings as well. Okay. It's not really a part of the choice process. I mean, I think inside me, I think I have all of the rules and all of the technical stuff inside, you know. And the majority of the time, I'm aiming to get what we used to call a grade 2 neg. Do you remember those days? Have you a film boy?
No. What's that?
Okay. Well, when I went to college to do photography, we were taught the most important thing is actually to get a good grade 2 neg, you know, that would print on grade 2 paper, you know, correctly exposed with detail in the shadow and detail in the highlight. If you didn't have detail in the shadows and you didn't have detail in the highlight, you actually adjusted your lighting accordingly, you know, to balance your picture up. But the idea was you got a good neg. You could make it more contrasty if you wanted in printing, you know. So my first thing to do is to get the exposure value correct first. You know, that's the most important thing. Now, also, if I'm working in low light, but now because I work with available light, I'm very often working in quite low light. So I'm actually having to use the extremes of the parameters of the aperture and shutter. And if I'm doing handheld, I'm never going to be shooting at less than 125th of a second. So that's my two priorities. Have I got some light? Yes, okay. The light's down to f2.8 at 125th of a second at 200 ISO. light starts to change, I have to either put my ISO up or stop shooting.
I gotcha.
So it's not necessarily a creative choice, but it's partly a creative choice.
Well, tell us about this next image.
This is part of an advertising campaign for a bridal wear, quite a renowned bridal wear designer in England called Lynn Ashworth. And this is actually first of all, I shoot all of her pictures very loose and very moving and running, Now, if you're shooting stuff and you've got a long lens, and you're obviously, because I'm shooting a commercial thing, it's the dress is the important stuff. If I'm shooting that with a long lens, for instance, two things. First of all, she's so damn far away from me she can't hear me, And secondly, I don't want her to be going out of the frame. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It's like with a wide angle lens and I'm working quite close, she's always going to be in my frame, So I don't have that sort of. So she's free to be able to move about as much as she wants, And also, it's a small garden, like a little sort of walled, wild sort of. It's at the back of a beautiful stately home in Staffordshire. So of course, I still want that sort of same feeling of stuff. I want also the gowns to be sort of luminous, and voluminous. And by shooting close, and I think I'm probably about waist height on this one. I can't remember. It's just a feel that you get from the shots, Again, if you look at the catalog, catalogs are all shot with a long lens. Model's not allowed to move and stuff, and I'm the opposite. I like to shoot things close, be able to communicate with my model, be able to sort of, have a banter with her so she can hear me, and I also like the effect of the pictures.
Yeah, and it makes sense that you're shooting with this particular lens, because having observed you photographing, it's not only the model that's constantly moving, you're constantly moving. You're not a guy there locked down on a tripod. You're dancing around as much as she is. So it makes sense that you're working with that range of focal length, because there's no way you could do it with a 200 or a 7200.
No. Also, I find that although it's not a great problem, I've often been faced with stuff when you're working with a long lens. And if you lose your focus, I could have had 20 frames have gone past that are out of focus, because I'm working that quick.
Mm-hmm.
I did a swimwear shoot in Vietnam a couple of years ago, 2014, I think it was. And I actually I did shoot that with an 80-200 because the client it was like little, crop tight swimwear shots and stuff for catalog. So I shot a lot of it on the 80-200, and so many of the shots were drifting out of focus, and before it would lock back. Sorry, this is because I'm shooting fast, on multiple frames. So of course my model is moving only a fraction of an inch, but she's gone out of focus because of it. But shooting with a wide angle, you don't get that because they're all sharp.
But when you're shooting,
it's not a priority. None of it's a priority. It's all about.
When you're shooting though, are you actively changing the focal length of the zoom, or are you sort of like setting it for approximately what you want?
Well, because she's moving and I'm moving, and often she's actually moving and coming towards me, so I'm often having to zoom wide, if you know what I mean. So I might start the shot off with her positioned and framed at the 55mm end, and she's walking toward me, so she probably gets maybe 3 or 4 paces in, and I've then got to go a little bit wider. So I'm changing my focal length as we're going. And also sometimes I see a framing that I actually want, and I think that's going to look so much nicer really wide, so I'll zoom right back out again. I don't believe in and certainly in the studio, for instance, I tell my students, why are you zooming in and out? What are you looking for? Because you're not going to find the picture by zooming in and out. You're going to find your picture by directing it and making the model be and do what you want her to be, whereas when you're out in nature, it's a different kettle of fish. You've got so many different things happening. And if you just move across to the right, you've got a totally different picture.
That's an excellent point.
Again, all these things are rules, and people like.
No, I think you make an excellent point there,
I've
because I
lost
think
you
when
for a
people
second.
get, yeah, I think what happens is that when people get locked, when they use a zoom, they stop moving and they just kind of zoom in and out, and they forget that perspective will change as a result of your relative change in position to your subject. And I think that's kind of like
Yes.
the advantage of using a fixed focal length, is that you have no other choice but to move in order to get that different perspective. And I think that,
Yes.
you know, you're a big proponent of not just changing the zooms, but moving physically. That it's using those two things in tandem
Yeah.
that help you get the shot.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah. And it's using everything to get the shot. And this was shot with a wide angle lens because it was a massive big room, but I didn't have any room to maneuver. No, but I actually wanted the effect. Look how voluminous that dress looks,
Yeah.
and how grand that room looks. Okay, it was very grand, and the dress is very as in voluminous. But by shooting this really wide and close like this, it actually exaggerates that more. I mean, it just sings out to you opulence and wealth, and the dream that a bride has of being. And it's for my client, this is actually too much like a wedding picture.
Hmm.
And for me, it's too much like a wedding picture. But it's a great one to explain this. And people are often scared of using a wide angle lens too much. But look how magnificent that picture is. The lines lead you in, the carpet leads you into the picture, and the painting leads you into the picture, and that heavy dark background behind pulls you right back, and the lighting on her makes you look at her. It's a beautiful picture.
Yeah, and in here, even if you are
Brilliant.
getting some distortions along the edges, it really kind of serves the dress, because it's sort of emphasizing the bigness of it.
Yes. It doesn't detract, does it? I don't think so.
No, no, not at all.
The thing that distracts me is the little bit of white from the edge of the window. But that's not
Oh,
cropped. That's just as it is.
yeah, yeah. I
See the
talk a
little
lot
white
about
edge?
it with my students, about scanning the edges of your frame, because that's
Yeah,
where
but you
you
see,
can
in the
be.
frame, you don't necessarily see that much of the frame, to be honest with you.
Oh,
Because I was
yeah.
worried I'm going to cut that dress off a little bit.
Oh,
And
that's true.
rather than
Yeah.
fiddle about moving the dress, I could have, if I moved a little bit further to the left, I actually was even closer to her. Do you know what I mean? So I was a bit
Mhm.
restricted. I couldn't really move. Sorry, go on, next picture. Yes.
All right. How about
Ah,
this one?
beautiful. Same story. I mean, she was very long and elegant anyway. But I mean, I had a huge, big studio. I wasn't short of space. Um, but again, she looks long and elegant.
And
It's
tell
a
us
lovely
about, was
picture. I
this for a
really love that picture
catalog,
myself.
or was?
Advertising campaign for the same designer as the last shot.
Okay.
In fact, for the same designer as the last two shots, but just a different shoot.
So how far would you say you are from her when
But
when
of
you're
the
making?
story, this is like, pardon?
How far were you from her when you were making this
So
photograph?
again, our borrowings. Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I would say no more than 8 to 10 feet.
Okay.
So quite close. Yeah,
And for
I would
people
say
who've
about
not
eight
had a
feet to
chance
ten.
to see you, what kind of things are you telling her? Because it looks like, she was playing a role here by tossing like the petals into the air, but
Well,
you
no, the
know,
client was behind throwing the petals.
oh, well, good. Okay,
Yeah,
all
the
right.
client was behind her throwing the petals, but she was meant to. Yeah. And in fact, in some of the frames of this, actually, you can see the client because I draped the studio in fabric, in like
Hmm.
net fabric. The whole studio was sort of covered in the stuff, and she was hiding behind one of the sheets of it, chucking the petals in, and you can see her behind the fabric.
So for a lot of your work, you're working both with strobe and with ambient light. And when you
This,
have and when you're
yes,
having someone move around a lot, I mean, for me, the choice of
mm,
aperture becomes particularly important, because if I have too shallow a depth
yes,
of field, you know, um, I
they're
may
moving
get
in and
part
out
of
of
the
it.
image
Yeah,
sharp but not another. And so when you're moving around a lot and they're moving
mhm.
around and you're shooting fairly wide, what's Do you kind of favor the smaller apertures just for that reason?
Well, this is actually shot with HMIs, so it's continuous. It's tungsten lighting.
Oh, okay. But can you tell me a little bit about the role of the aperture when people are moving around and to ensure that you get, because here the whole dress is important.
At f5, probably about 5. Oops, sorry, Fabian, we've got a delay here. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's probably shot because again, I'm working with light, but even the HMIs they're not that bright. You know, it's not like you're using flash. But I think this is probably shot around about f4, 5, 6, up at the sort of 250th, 500th of a second, because she was dancing and moving. But I actually, when I'm shooting like this, when you must have heard me, when I'm shooting and directing, there's a combination of there's the creative directing, and there's also that controlled directing where I actually not get my model to freeze for me, but I get her to go into like a slow motion thing, but keep the atmosphere in the picture. And I take a double check. You know, I see a beautiful frame happening. I then take serious control of the situation. I've got the picture, and if necessary, do it again, like 5, 6 times if necessary. You know, right. To make sure I've got all those things right, and then check focus, check the movement. You still there?
Yeah, I'm moving on to another picture here.
Hello. Yeah. All that, by the way, because it's actually quite important, because that's a big part of all of my pictures. You know, not the technical stuff, but the actual the controlling the situation to get what you want in the shot. You know, not let the model do all the work. You know, she was a great model, that other girl. She's almost like a dancer, but still, she doesn't see the line that you're seeing in the picture. Do you know what I mean?
Right, absolutely.
This I wanted to show this grand tree. This is in the garden here at the house. It's just outside. It's a huge, big. I'm not sure. It might be a Douglas fir. It's a huge thing, you know. Probably about 200 and something years old. Beautiful tree. And there are other shots in this set where I actually made much more use of the wide lens, to be honest with you. But also, again, I wanted her to exaggerate her legs and stuff. Although it's not very obvious, but it's not so much the picture on the right, it's the picture on the left. Page spread. And I'm sort of, if I remember rightly, sort of kneeling on the floor to do this picture. So I'm probably about at her, just in the middle of her thigh height, you know. Just to emphasize that situation, to see more of the tree, you know, because often you see a picture of a model and the photographer just framing the picture with just the model in it, you know. And this is a situation where I actually want to see more of the tree, you know.
Yeah, I think that, and that's one of the advantages of using a wide to moderate telephoto zoom is the ability to be able to contextualize the subject within a place, within the scene. Even though you're doing fashion and glamour, a lot of the best stuff that I like is when the photographer
texture-wise, really,
excuse me. Well, what I like is that I like when a photographer provides a sense of place for the model, as much as I like.
Yes, exactly. You know, well, that's why you do it, isn't it? I mean, it's because it's a story, isn't it? You know, and with all those other, you know, with the background or the things, the objects or whatever is are in the tree, or the whatever you want to call it, but it creates a story, you know. Whereas there's a thing is actually a model. I mean, it's the difference between a picture of a pretty girl and a picture that has a story behind it. And often a big mistake that photographers make, and this is a thing that my mother taught me about when I first started taking pictures. Because all my pictures were just like, you know, the picture of the girl looking at the camera, smiling, sometimes with clothes on, sometimes without clothes on, you know, whatever. But my mum used to say, "Oh, your pictures are really nice, but they're only pretty pictures of pretty girls," you know.
Mm.
And I used to get quite upset about this, because, and I actually did that first job in 1983 of that beautiful black ball gown, which the picture.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I mentioned the black and white black ball gown. Do you remember it, the Baronix?
Yeah. How about this last one?
Yeah. Okay. Again, it's the same as the first one. The portrait picture. I'm actually kneeling on the bed with her, taking this picture of her. We've been jumping about and bouncing up and down, not as in making pictures, by the way. Okay. I just decided that when we'd done all this jumping up and down stuff, she looked a little bit messed up, as in, I don't know if you remember that. I certainly can remember that sort of look,
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I actually liked, and I wanted to shoot it. Because I was then working in a bedroom in a place called the Palace, which is a lovely big house outside London. And the bedroom was really nice, but it wasn't that big, So again, I was shooting at the end of the bed with a wide angle lens, and she's jumping up in the air and stuff, And then I decided to, as always, I'd done the main shot, the big sort of wide shot of the room, and I did the picture of her a bit closer, and then of course just come in and do the portrait shot. The way I see it is like, right, now is the time to get the cover picture, And also, when you've been working with somebody, you become more connected and more connected and more connected. And by the time you've been shooting for 5 or 10 minutes, you've got that little moment, right? Okay, let's get that lovely, beautiful, connected headshot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what that is. And it looks like. May I swear on here? May I be rude? I don't know. No, maybe not. Maybe I'll upset people. But it's that look,
Yeah.
Do you know the look?
Oh, these are great, great photographs. Let me get out of the screen share here.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's really interesting talking to you about this because I've known you for a long time, and I've known a lot of your work. But
Yes.
you really speak to this idea of a focal length being the means by which you are able to engage your subject. So much of the discussion about focal length revolves around the technical, in terms of sharpness, in terms of contrast, in terms of relative depth of field. But you're using this so that you can work in the way it works for you. That allows you to sort of engage with your subject in that way. And I think that's something that's not talked a lot about, but it really makes perfect sense when you explain it.
Yeah, because it's like this. It's a part of the process of everything is about making the picture. As in, when I say everything, they're all little parts of things that build up what makes a great picture. And the way I see it, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and let's say there's 10 pieces to the jigsaw puzzle. And before you start, there's like 9 pieces of this jigsaw puzzle are already made, and the last one and the most important one is those moments that are occurring whilst you're making that picture, because you look at when they're viewing it, they're looking at that moment, and they're thinking or feeling or seeing, hopefully thinking, feeling or seeing what happened just before, what happened during, and what happened after the picture was taken. And if you look at a picture, there's like no story to it, there's nothing behind it, it doesn't look like there's any energy or any emotion or any feelings going on. People look at the picture and it just becomes uninteresting. There's no story behind it. And the way I see it, I see it as being that I have to put as much into a still picture as into a whole scene in a movie to get the feeling and the emotion across. If somebody's making a movie, they've got an awful lot of work to get that movement and feeling and emotion and a story and stuff. Where I like to catch all that stuff in one frame. It's actually not. If you actually look at the whole series of pictures from the beginning to the end of a particular shot, for instance, there'll be a lot of movement going on, a lot of different things happening, as if it was a moving picture. Because as you know, I don't let my model stop. I keep them moving.
Yeah, you make them earn the check.
And this thing, that they call flow posing. So what the fuck is flow posing? You know, it's like ridiculous. You know, it's just movement. Life, people are alive and living, and a picture. And also another way of looking at this is to actually, if you look at the difference between a great sculpture like Michelangelo Buonarroti and some other strange guy who likes making sculptures, you know, and if you look at the life in his work and look at the life in the work of and a horse that is a painted horse or a drawn horse with pencil, it actually looks alive. It looks like it could actually hop out of off the page, you know, and that, or a statue looks like it could immediately come alive. And this is what happens with pictures. I want the picture to actually be a tiny moment that you've frozen that's still alive and moving. And that's, again, all this whole process. And the choice of lens is a mechanical part of that, you know. So the lens is one of the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, you know. So only 1/10 of the important things, you know. Yeah. But it's the lens that I could live without any lenses as long as I had that one.
Well, that's great. I mean, this has just been a great discussion. But why don't you tell people where they can find you and find your work? And I know that you had a recent effort that you wanted to share with us, and tell us about that as well.
What was that? Sorry, what did you want to hear?
Tell people where they can find you and your work, and because I know you do a variety of different things.
Yeah, my workshops and stuff. But you said something else too.
Yeah, whatever you want to share, go right ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, if you want to have a look at my work, my website is brucesmithphotographer.com. On that web page, you'll see some links on the right-hand side, which will lead you to my workshops, which I'm not trying to do less of, but I'm actually trying to do, rather than big bulk workshops or doing big talks and stuff and things, although I like doing talks at the conventions and stuff, but I'm actually pushing to do more one-to-ones where I invite people to come over to France, or I can come wherever you want me, but you've got to pay my travel and my hotel. But here we have a great place. It's a fantastic place to shoot. It's a fantastic place to live. Wonderful place to be able to show people how to do pictures that are in a very grand setting or in the rough, in the old French buildings and old French chateaus and stuff that are nearby. We've got lakes and swimming pool and stuff. So, but anyway, there's if you go and have a look at the various options that you can choose from, I do occasionally do group workshops and stuff, but I'm trying to do less of those because they're actually it's actually quite stressful. Not just the actual doing of it, you know, so much, but the actual run up to it, because you've got a lot of things you've got to commit to, you know, whereas one-to-ones is much more. And I think also it's a much better way of teaching people because you actually get inside the student, you know, and you can understand more in depth what they actually need to take them where they want to go with their pictures. And it doesn't matter if you're just an amateur or a semi-professional or a professional or hobbyist, whatever you call yourselves, you know. My thing is about teaching people to make better pictures, not necessarily teaching you how to go. Well, I can teach you, or I can lead you on the way to becoming whatever you want regarding shooting people as a photographer. But my ambition is just to fill people with some enthusiasm and inspire them. So,
and you wrote.
If you have any questions about stuff, please give me a call. You know.
And did you write something recently?
Say again, sorry.
Did you write something recently?
I've written lots of stuff, but I'm a bit absent-minded today for some strange reason.
Okay.
And I haven't had any. I only had one glass of wine, so I'm not drunk. I've written a few different things. I've actually got to do an article. In fact, that reminds me, I've got an article to write for a magazine at the moment I've forgotten about. I need to get that done. Did I tell you about something I'd written?
I thought you did, but that's if not, I'll put it in the show notes below if we.
And if I remember, I'll tell you. You know.
But thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining us. We're just going to end the recording.
The quality is not.
we're dealing with a delay, so it's kind of problematic. But hopefully, people haven't minded the sort of technical issues we'd had with this recording. But there was content I thought was really great.
A bit like our photography, isn't it? You know.
Yeah. But thanks for joining us, guys. If you have any comments or questions about stuff, post them below. And
yeah.
And for anyone who's interested, and if you're in the LA area, in a couple of weekends, we will have Los Angeles Center of Photography is having a street photography week, which culminates in a weekend where a bunch of street photographers do presentations, including myself. I'll have information on that in the show notes, as well as if you go to lacp.org, and you can find out more information there. So thanks a lot again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Ciao.